Last chapter, chapter 26. He walked off into the moonlight. The moon was full and bright that night, and it looked so perfect that it wouldn't be real. It was as if he had painted and hung there on a hook. It was so impossibly beautiful. There wasn't any snow there. Never is at Christmas these days, except on the cards. Instead, the streets were damp from the storm, and the moon was reflected in hundreds of the puddles. Most of the houses were adorned with Christmas decorations of one sort and another, with fairy-lit trees glistening through the double glazing. The decorations looked almost beautiful too, competing with the moon and the stars in their own feeble way. All you could hear was the rhythmic scuff of Mr. Stink's battered brogues as he walked slowly along the road, the Duchess following dutifully a pace behind with her head bowed. Chloe watched him unseen from upstairs window. Her hand touched the glass, trying to reach out to him. She watched him disappear out of sight before slopping back to her room. Then, sitting there on her bed, she remembered a reason to see him one last time. Lily and the flesh-eating zombie teachers, she shouted as she ran down the road. Miss Chloe, said Mr. Stink, turning round. I've been thinking about Lily's second venture. I would love to tell you it now. Write it down for me, child. Write it down? Asked Chloe. Yes, said Mr. Stink. One day I want to walk into a bookshop and see your name on the covers. You have a talent for telling stories, Chloe. Do I? Chloe had never felt she had a talent for anything. Yes. All that time spent alone in your room will pay off one day. You have an extraordinary imagination, young lady, a real gift. You should share it with the world. Thank you, Mr. Stink, said Chloe shyly. I'm glad you came running after me, though, said Mr. Stink. I just remembered I've something to tell you. For me? You have something for you? For me? Yes, I saved up all my loose change and I bought it for you for a Christmas present. I think it's something rather special. Mr. Stink rummaged in the bag and pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper and tied it up with string. He handed it to Chloe, who unwrapped it excitedly. Inside was a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle stationery set. It is a teeny bopper mucus karate tortoise thing, I thought. You'd like it. Mr. Raj told me it was the very last one in the shop. Did he know? Chloe smiled. This is the best present I've ever had. She wasn't lying. That Mr. Stink had saved up all his pennies to buy her something that meant the world to her. I will treasure this forever, I promise. Thank you, said Mr. Stink. And you've given my whole family the best Christmas present ever. You brought us together. Well, I'm not sure I can take all the credit for that, he smiled. Now, you really should go home, young Chloe. It's cold and it feels like it's going to rain. I don't like the thought of you sleeping outside, she said, especially on the cold, damp night like this. Mr. Stink smiled. I like being outside, you know. On our wedding night, my darling Violet showed me the brightest star in the sky. Do you see? That was there. He pointed it out. It twinkled brightly like his. I see it, said Chloe. Well, that night we stood on the balcony of our bedroom and she said she would love me forever. And as long as the star keeps shining. So every night before I go to sleep, I like to gaze at the star and think about her and the great love we shared. I see the star and it's like I see her. That's beautiful, said Chloe, trembling and trying not to cry. My wife hasn't gone. Every night she meets me in my dreams. Now, go home and don't worry about me, Miss Chloe. I have the Duchess and my star. But I'll miss you, said Chloe. Mr. Stink smiled and pointed up at the sky. Do you see Violet's star? He asked. Chloe nodded. Do you see there's another little star just under it? Yes, said Chloe. Up in the night sky. Violet's star burned brightly. Below it is a smaller star twinkled in the darkness. Well, you are a very special young lady, said Mr. Stink, and when I look at that star, I'm going to think about you. Chloe felt overwhelmed. Thank you, she said, and I'll look at it and think about you. She gave him a big hug and didn't want to let go. He stood still and held her for a moment before rocking a little to set himself free. I have to go now. My soul is restless and I need to wander. Goodbye, Miss Chloe. Goodbye, Mr. Stink. The wanderer wandered off down the road as night slinked like a panther down the sky. She watched him disappear out of sight until all that could be heard was the silence echoing around the streets. Later that night, Chloe sat alone in her bed. Mr. Stink was gone, perhaps forever, but she could still smell him. She would always be able to smell him. She opened her maths exercise book and began to write the first words of the new story. Mr. Stink stank. And there he is.